Oh, hey, I didn't see that. It's Adam, better known as Life with Monster Girls, and I'm here to bring you another cringy fan fiction reading. This is all requested by a lot of you guys, so this is all your guys' fault. So, now to let you know, I will leave a link to the fan fiction in the description, so if you wanted to follow along or read it by yourself, you are free to do that. Without further ado, let's get started. Now, this is a fanfiction between the characters Poppy and Sue, and an original character from the series Monster Musume. Enjoy! Poppy looked down at the address in her claw. She was staying the weekend at one of Kimihito Karusu's friend's house for the weekend while he was away for work. Poppy goes up to the door and knocks, and a young man answers. "Oh, hello, Poppy. How are you?" The man smiled and laughed a little. "Yes, I am John. Come in, Poppy." "Okay." Poppy excitedly went in, and John showed her around the house, and afterward they had dinner together. But Poppy had forgotten to give a note to John explaining that tonight was a full moon, and Poppy would lose control of herself. The two had a pleasant evening, and became very well acquainted friends as the night drew on. Learning of each other, John felt fairly fond of Poppy, but shrugged it off for now. After dinner, well into the night, at about 11, John settled on the couch and let Poppy cuddle with him as they watched some anime on the TV. The two fell asleep after a few episodes, but little did Dalen know he was going to be awakened by a very lustful harpy. I don't know why the name is different. At about 3 in the morning, John woke to Poppy sitting on his lap, her hips rocking back and forth as she bit her lip and looked at her temporary master. "Master," she moaned a little as she ground against John's crotch. Her body was hot and her feminine juices soaking through her panties. Jesus Christ. John woke up with a start. Still half asleep, he blushed as he looked to the harpy riding his lap and stuttered, "But Poppy!" He felt himself growing harder, as he often grew would in his sleep. He was then on a half daze as he tried to get his bearings on whether this was a dream of the adorable harpy on him, or if it was reality. This is terrible grammar, by the way. Poppy looked at him, her eyes overcome with lust as the light from the TV shone up behind her. "But please, master, mate with me." She lifted her skirt and bit it, exposing her small, perky breasts, which jiggled slightly with her movement on his lap. John placed his hands on her waist and ground back up into her, his rod fully hard. Accepting this as a dream, he leaned up and kissed the cute girl before leaning back again. I feel like the cops are on the way right now. Poppy smiled through her shirt as she held it in her teeth and tried to unbutton John's pants, but the claws on her wings were no help. John chuckled a little and unbuttoned his pants and pulled them off along with his underwear, allowing his cock to spring up to attention. Poppy blushed, her flushed face turning crimson red as she bent down to suck and lick his cock like a popsicle. As the harpy dunked her head up and down, John reached forward and took her head roughly by the hair and thrust it harder into her mouth as she bobbed. Poppy moaned loudly, vibrating her throat against the large rod in her mouth. Oh, God. The sensation of her mouth was all too real as John began to realize this was no dream, but there was no turning back now. He knew she wanted him and that he wanted her, and he could not stop his own body from wanting hers. John then suddenly forced his cock down her small, tight throat as he came, and after a moment pulled her off and watched the cum drip from her mouth, and she coughed a bit. My God. He smiled and let her recover and wiped the cum from her mouth and his thumb, thinking she looked so adorable in this position. After a moment, Poppy stood and pulled down her panties and climbed on top of John's lap, hovering her dripping wet slit over his hard shaft. John smiles and rubs his hand up and down the girl's thighs. Her body quivered from his touch as he slowly her down onto his hot, throbbing rod. The engorged tip wide parted her tight virgin hole, sliding her between her wet, slick lips and grinding into her clit. He adjusted himself and used his hand to direct it to her opening and push it into her. Poppy chewed on her lip and moaned even louder as the slick organ penetrated her delicate sex. What the fuck? Poppy leaned her head back and cooed in pleasure as he pushed past her hymen, slowly daring it as John pushed most of himself into the harpy and began thrusting slowly. Poppy squirmed a little on top of him as he held helped her ride his stiff rod slowly. Master. Poppy moaned out as she began to take more of his cock. John smirked and moved Poppy up and down, letting her slowly get used to the size of him inside of her. After a few months, John suddenly flipped, still inside her as he now held himself over her, his hands on the back of the couch. John leaned in and kissed the little Poppy as he began thrusting slowly and gently. After a moment, he broke the kiss and smiled as he looked down at Poppy, moaning and cooing. Her tight walls tightened and massaged John's cock. He moaned as his breathing picked up pace along with his thrusting, now pushing his full length into Poppy. She wrapped her wing-like arms around John's neck as her walls suddenly tightened further and she came. Her small body trembled in pleasure as he did not stop, making her come again and again. He thrust a little harder and faster until he finally came, thrusting hard and deep. He shot his load into Poppy. She arched her back and screamed out in pleasure as she came with John. Her body shook as she arched in pleasure, his hot seed filling her up to the brim before spilling out the entrance to her pussy. Chapter 2. Bath time. The pair tried to catch their breath as they fell onto the couch, Poppy moaning slightly as she had aftershocks coming a few times after a hard one, even after he pulled out. John smiled and pulled her close and hugged her while smoothing her down her more than ruffled feathers. They were both a hot, sticky mess, and John kissed Poppy's cheek and said, "Hey, how about we go clean up in the bath?" Poppy blushed and nodded slightly as John held her. He then stood up, picking up the tiny girl and carrying her to the Japanese bathroom. John smiled as he set the harpy, what the fuck is wrong with me, on the stool in front of the shower head. He then took off the shower head and turned on the water, letting it heat up before helping Poppy slowly strip. He pulled off her skirt over her wings, being the last thing she had on. He smiled and looked down at the beautiful naked girl. He then pulled off his shirt and lifted the shower head to rinse her body, sending beads of water streaming down her wings and petite frame. John watched as her body glistened in the light. After a bit of rinsing and making sure Poppy was completely wet, he quickly rinsed his own body with a speedy jet of water. John then took soap in his hand and had Poppy stand. Here, John patted his leg for Poppy to sit, and she did. John then wrapped his arms around her small wet frame, and as he began to slowly rub suds across her stomach and onto her hips, then up towards her torso. He rubs his hands up and down across her breasts, and she begins rubbing his hand around her breasts and then begins rubbing her nipples. She moans softly as he begins rubbing and pinching her nipples. Poppy squirmed a little on top of John's lap. After a few moments, John stopped playing with her breasts and moved on to running his hands along her entire body, feeling and soaping every inch of it except for her still cum-soaked pussy. Oh my God, what is wrong with me? John smiled and handed the soap to Poppy and smiled. "Here, your turn to wash me." Poppy blushed and turned around and began washing John. Her breathing was a little deep and fast from him playing with her body. She diligently soaped John down. After Poppy was done, John then stood and grabbed the head over the shower and began to rinse the both of them off. Then he smiles and suddenly pulled Poppy's leg and lifted it. Spreading her legs, he began to spray with water on her nether regions, beginning to rinse her. These people need to learn English. He let go of her leg and used his hand to spread her lips as she moaned, unable to stop him as her hands were now on the floor behind her to keep her from falling back. John brought the head of the shower closer to her delicate opening, increasing the pressure of the relentless pounding of the jets of water. He pulled her lips a little further, opening her hole and shooting streams of water up into her and flushing the cum out with new hot water. She moaned and quivered in pleasure as the water quickly filled her small walls to the brim. John then smirked and directed the water onto her clit, and using his finger he pulled back the hood, exposing the hypersensitive organ. Poppy threw her head back and after a few moments came with a loud moaning and squirted the water out of her that had been trapped inside. John smirked and stepped back, looking down at his handiwork before turning off the water and picking up the satisfied girl. He carried her to the bath and sat in the water while holding her in his lap with her head and shoulders just above the water. When he lowered her down, she blushed, feeling his hard rod pushing on her legs. John smiled, seeing her adorable blush, and turned her so that one leg was on either side of his waist. He leaned up and kissed her neck and ground his tip against her slit beneath the water. Poppy moaned softly as he pushed on her still sensitive clit. Master, she cooed. John laughed a minute and shifted himself, and without warning, her pushing herself suddenly up into Poppy, causing her to cry out in pleasure. She wrapped her arms tight around his neck as he began to thrust up into her once again, but this time much harder and faster than the first. She bounced up and down on him in time with his thrust as he leaned her head back and cried out in pleasure. John then smiled and decided to take her further into pleasure yet by reaching down and rubbing her clit as he thrust faster. Poppy arched her back and came once again as John kept on ravaging her tiny pussy. This continued as he fucked her in the warm water of the tub, making her come again and again before finally coming himself, once again overfilling her and making it spill out into the water around their waists. Chapter 3. Slime Girl. The couple relaxed for a moment, and John pulls out a pop in the water, flushing some of the cum out of her quickly as water replaces his dick for a moment. She moans softly and leans back in the tub and floats for a moment. Then she suddenly sits up and goes, "Oh, I forgot, Sue is here." John looks at Poppy for a moment, confused, and at that moment John feels a wet and slimy pair of arms reach around him. Two massive breasts press against his back and squeeze against him. John jumps up and spins around to see a full-bodied woman. With large, supple breasts and thighs, along with a large rump, the green Kirby woman looked at John confused as he jumped back from her and tilted her head in confusion. Poppy jumped up, running to Sue and hugging her, burying her face in Sue's giant bust. "Sue, I forgot we came together." Sue smiled and hugged Poppy back, but then at that moment something strange began to happen. Sue. Sue, in the blink of an eye, had lifted the wet Harvey up in her slimy tentacles and began to lick the gum out of her dripping cunt. "Oh wow." Poppy moaned and twitched as Sue loved her sensitive cunt. Then, without warning, Sue took a gooey tentacle and molded it into the shape of a penis and pushed it into Poppy with ease as she cried out in pleasure. Sue made another tentacle and shoved it into Poppy's mouth as she still held her up in the air, letting her tentacles fuck Poppy till she came again and again. John stood shocked as he watched the slime pleasure the harpy till she came at least 3 times. When Sue was finished, she looked to John, ready to satisfy her next victim. Sue set the panting and twitching girl on the floor before walking over to John, swinging her hips smoothly as she walked. She reached over and lifted the man into the air and pulled him close to her thick body, his face pushed against her breasts. Her slick slime tentacles enveloped John's upper body, keeping him from moving at all. He struggled slightly and his face flushed when he felt something slick and gooey around his hard-on that he had gotten from the ordeal. When he looked, Sue was grinding her slit against the man's tip as her hand massaged it up and down. John groaned slightly as his member was almost expertly pleasured. Then he slowly inserted into the slime's body, able to see every detail through her belly. He watched her move up and down on his cock, moaning a little softly. The slime's tentacles loosened and John grabbed her plump, jiggly ass and begins to turn the tables and fuck this thick, beautiful woman. After a moment of fucking her while holding onto her ass, her reaches to her breasts and pulls her stand straight. Sue's back against John's chest. He holds onto her massive breast, squeezing and pulling as he thrusts. Okay. Sue moans out in a mimicking way of how Poppy had been previously, but soon started to take on her own voice. Through just then, John's body was sucked into Sue's. She turned him around and pulled his head out from between her breasts, letting him go through the membrane that held her body, and pulled him out and thickened the membrane once he passed through. Sue pushed him onto the floor and centered herself over his rock-hard erection. She lowered herself onto it and began riding John's rod. John groaned a bit in pleasure as he watched his dick inside the transparent woman. Watching her clear walls being stretched by his cock, he began to thrust up into her bouncing, then quickly sinking with his thrusts. This made fast and powerful motions between the two, shoving him all the way inside Sue. Her large, voluptuous breasts bounced up and down in time with her fucking until John reached up and grabbed her breasts, squeezing and massaging them. Sue leaned her head back and moaned softly as John fucked her jello-like body. John then had an idea to pleasure his large-breasted lover. He flips them over so he is pinning her down and takes hold of her giant breasts in his hands. Leaning down to her left breast, he sucks hard on her nipple, and to his surprise, water draws out of her tit. John sucks and drinks from her breast, making Sue moan out and coo in pleasure as he begins to thrust between her supple thighs once again. John picks up speed and switches to her other breast before finally delivering one powerful thrust into her gooey cunt and coming, able to see his cum shoot into the green jelly over her body. Sue moans and goes limp under the man as he stands up and sighs, rubbing the back of his neck, laughing a little. Are you too satisfied? Because I know I am. John smiles, looking at two well-relieved monsters as the sun peeks through his window. The morning now greeting the cum-soaked scene. And that is the end of the fanfiction.
Kill yourself.